Let's go to Luke chapter 20. The first two verses are, "And it came about on one of the days while he was teaching the people in the temple and preaching the gospel, that the chief priests and the scribes with the elders confronted him. And they spoke, saying to him, 'Tell us by what authority you're doing these things, or who is the one that gave you this authority?'" You see, these religious leaders, they were given authority by the traditions of men. And they came to Yeshua and asked him, "Do you have the credentials to teach the people? Do you have the credentials?" They want to expose him as one who has no authority to teach, and to say, he can't be going around saying the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Who are you to say that? Where do you get your credentials from? By what authority are you doing this? Verses 3 and 4. "And he answered and said to them, I shall also ask you a question, and you tell me. Was the baptism of John from heaven or from men?" They were wanting to trip him up in front of the people again. But Yeshua doesn't fall for their trap. You know, were they really interested in the source of his authority? No, not at all.
You probably knew it.
They did. They knew who he was and where he was from. They just wanted to ask him, they just wanted to publicly question his qualifications. Okay? That's what they're wanting to do. So he turns the question around on them. You know, really, I don't know if you noticed it or not, this is the same question they asked him, only he turned it to John the Baptist. You know, really, where did John the Baptist get the authority? Where did he get his authority? That's what he's asking them. Yeshua knew when someone had a sincere question. He knew when they were only interested in berating him and berating his people. He knew when that was. And when that would happen, he would turn it around and ask a question back at him, which would be the same thing, which is what he did here. In Matthew 15, starting at verse 1, "Then some Pharisees and scribes came to Yeshua from Jerusalem, saying, 'Why do your disciples transgress the tradition of the elders? For they do not wash their hands when they eat bread.' And he answered and said to them, 'And why do you yourselves transgress the commandment of Elohim for the sake of your tradition? For Elohim said, honor your father and mother, and he who speaks evil of father or mother, let him be put to death. But you say, whoever shall say to his father or mother, anything of mine you might have been helped by has been given to Elohim. He's not to honor his father or his mother. Thus you invalidated the word of Elohim for the sake of your tradition.'" So he was good at turning these things around. Verses 5 and 6. "And they reasoned among themselves, saying, if we say from heaven, will he say, why did you not believe him? But if we say from men, all the people will stone us to death, for they're convinced that John was a prophet." So the religious leaders knew they couldn't answer this question. There was no correct answer. They would either lose their dignity or their lives. And they chose to lose neither. Verses 7 and 8, "And they answered that they did not know where it came from. And Yeshua said to them, neither will I tell you by what authority I do these things." Since Yeshua is the word of his Father that became flesh, he uses his Father's word to bring them down. We read in Job 5, verses 12 and 13, "He frustrates the plotting of the shrewd so that their hands cannot attain success. He captures the wise by their own shrewdness, and the advice of the cunning is quickly thwarted." In Proverbs 26, verses 4 and 5, I love these verses. "Do not answer a fool according to his folly, lest you also be like him. Answer a fool as his folly deserves, lest he be wise in his own eyes." Okay, explain that. Oh, don't they directly contradict each other?
No.
Why not?
Why?
Well, do you answer a fool or not?
Say what?
Do you answer a fool or don't you?
No.
Sometimes you do. Sometimes you don't. Okay? Sometimes you do. Sometimes you don't. That's what he's saying here. And as wisdom grows, you learn when to do it and when not to. As a young smart aleck You might think, oh, I'm not going to let them get away with saying that. Whereas as you are a little wiser, you say, no, they're just hanging themselves with their own rope. Just let them go. You can see that. Sometimes you let them go. Other times, well, no, now you're just being plain wrong, and you correct them. So it just depends. It just depends. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. There's no secret formula there for the right answer. Going back to Luke 20, verses 9 and 10. And he began to tell the people this parable. A man planted a vineyard and rented it out to vine growers and went on a journey for a long time. And at the harvest time, he sent a slave to the vine growers in order that they might give him some of the produce of the vineyard. But the vine growers beat him and sent him away empty-handed. Now, this parable is very similar when it's given in the Tanakh, and that's in Isaiah chapter 5. And it's one of the first full parables we have in Scripture. Starting in verse 1, we read, Now let me sing now for my well-beloved a song of my beloved concerning his vineyard. My well-beloved had a vineyard on a fertile hill, and he dug it all around, removed its stones, and planted it with the choicest vine. And he built a tower in the middle of it, and he hewed out a wine vat in it. Then he expected it to produce good grapes, but it produced only worthless ones. And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more was there to do for my vineyard that I have not done in it? Why, when I expected it to produce good grapes, did it produce worthless ones? So now let me tell you what I'm going to do to my vineyard. I'll remove its hedge, and it'll be consumed. I'll break down its wall, and it'll become trampled ground. And I'll lay it waste. It will not be pruned or hoed, but briars and thorns will come up. I'll also charge the clouds to rain no rain on it. For the vineyard of Yahweh of hosts is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah his delightful plant. Thus he looked for justice, but behold bloodshed, for righteousness, but behold a cry of distress. Also Jeremiah 2, verse 21, Yet I planted you a choice vine, a completely faithful seed. How then have you turned yourself before me into the degenerate shoots of a foreign vine? Now the symbolism in the parable is very easily discerned by itself. But the Tanakh makes references blatantly obvious. The man who planted the vineyard, that's Elohim. The vineyard itself is the land of Israel. Okay? The vine growers he rented it to are the leaders of the sons of Israel. The slaves that are sent to the vine growers are the prophets. Verse 11 of Luke 20. And he proceeded to send another slave, and they beat him also and treated him shamefully and sent him away empty-handed. And he proceeded to send a third, and this one also they wounded and cast out. And the owner of the vineyard said, What shall I do? I'll send my beloved son. Perhaps they will respect him. So Elohim sent many prophets to Israel, but they treated them shamefully and wounded them and cast them out. In his abundant grace and mercy, Elohim sent his beloved son. He gave them a chance to listen to him and to respect him. Verse 14, But when the vine growers saw him, they reasoned with one another, saying, This is the heir. Let us kill him, that the inheritance may be ours. And they threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. What, therefore, will the owner of the vineyard do to them? He'll come and destroy these vine growers, and will give the vineyard to others. And when they heard it, they said, May it never be. Okay, several things here. You know, these vine growers here, did they, when the owner of the vineyard sent his son, they say, Well, we don't know who you are. Did they say that? No. They didn't say that. What did they say? That's the heir. So is he saying that, which we've said it before, is Yeshua saying that the Pharisees and the scribes know who he is? Yes. Well, they sure do. They know exactly who he is. He's the heir, and they know it. He's the Messiah. they didn't care that he was the beloved son of the Father. They had another agenda. They felt they could not rule the vineyard, the kingdom, and receive the inheritance of the kingdom if the son of the Father was alive. That's what they decided. So, they kill him. He refused to hitch up to their wagon anyway. And they didn't want to change their wagon. Okay? That wagon was built over hundreds of years of tradition by their daddy and their granddaddy and their great-granddaddy and their great-great-great-granddaddy. So they weren't going to change their wagon. Right, there's a lack of effort to research in Christianity. But you see, and then we're going to relinquish that power. And the thing is, what did they consider as important as the word of the Father? Tradition. Tradition. Okay? Even above the word of the Father. Making the word of the Father of no effect, as Yeshua said. So, what was more important? Their traditions. Yeah, well, they thought God would they thought Elohim would honor their efforts for their traditions, because that's how they looked at their traditions. They thought Elohim looked at them the same way. And he said, no, I don't. You know, and you're talking about, like, the traditions of Christianity, they don't go back and research the roots anymore, okay? And of what it is. And the roots are really just the book itself. Just study the book itself. And that's what's important. But what happened, what has happened, is it Christianity, and it's like our legal system. You know, we don't have a justice system anymore. It's a legal system. And it's not built upon the actual rule of law so much as it's built upon precedent. All right? When precedent has been set, well, then you build upon that precedent. Okay, then you build another precedent, build upon that precedent, and then more precedent is built upon that. Right? Before you know it, how far away from the root of what the law actually said? You're far, far away from it. That's what's happened with Christianity. They built themselves upon precedents. Okay? And I was talking to my neighbor here just the other day, and I said, tell me one thing about church, Sunday worship, Christmas, Easter, anything you do in church that is in the Bible. One thing. Is there one thing? She said, no, I can't think of anything. I said, that's right, because it's all built upon precedents. She understood that because she's a lawyer, too. Yeah. You know, there's a sordid history there for sure, but it's looking at His Word. That's why all I really want to do when we get together is study His Word, because that's plenty. All right. There's nothing wrong with singing. There's nothing wrong with, you know, these other things, or even Hebrew dancing or whatever. But I just want to spend as much time in His Word as much as possible, because there's a lot there. And it's going to be years and years and years before we get through all of it. And then there's so much that we missed that we need to go back over it again. So that's what we do. But anyway, Yeshua, he says, after they kill the beloved Son of the Father, Elohim will destroy those in Israel. And he says he's going to give the vineyard to others. Okay, what's the vineyard again? The land. Very good. The very good. He's going to give the land to others. See, the account of others that Elohim gave the land of Israel to after the death of Yeshua, that is recorded in the Revelation. Okay? That's what the book's all about. He said he was going to do it. All the nations that ruled the land of Israel since the death of Yeshua until his return are recorded in Revelation in very distinct detail. Now, it's symbolic. And I've read a lot of commentaries that claim this parable is saying that God destroyed the Jews and made his new people the church. Okay? That's a popular view. This is absurd. And it's ridiculous explanations such as this that just show a lack of understanding Scripture at all. Because what is the vineyard again? It's the land. It's not a new people. Okay? He's going to give it to others, and he does. The land is given to other pagan nations. And Yeshua, in the next chapter, is going to even say, for how long? Okay, it's very interesting. He says in Luke 21, verses 23 and 24, "Woe to those who are with child and to those who nurse babes in those days, for there'll be great distress upon the land and wrath to this people. And they'll fall by the edge of the sword and will be led captive into all the nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled." See, I don't know if people understand that this passage in verse 24 is tied to that parable, where it said he's going to hand the vineyard back over to other people. But that's exactly what he's talking about. Until the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled. Well, Jerusalem is not necessarily trampled underfoot by the Gentiles anymore. You know? That's what's interesting here. That's what's interesting. Not since, June 10th, 1967. Oh my gosh, that was just 50 years ago. 50 years and a few months. Let's continue in Luke chapter 20. Verses 17 and 18, "But he looked at them and said, What then is this that is written? The stone which the builders rejected, this became the chief cornerstone. Everyone who falls on that stone will be broken to pieces, but on whomever it falls, it will scatter him like dust." Now, Yeshua is quoting Psalm 118. Starting at verse 21, we read, "I shall give thanks to you, for you have answered me, and you have become my salvation." That's the Hebrew word Yeshua. You have become my Yeshua. The stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. Now, this is Yahweh's doing. It is marvelous in our eyes. Now, the religious leaders in that day claimed the destruction of Israel again would not happen. Yeshua says, then, what's that passage in Isaiah saying? He's saying they'll reject him and he will become ruler over them. Yeshua makes obvious references to parables and prophecies of him in the Tanakh. In Isaiah 8, verses 14 and 15, we read, "Then he shall become a sanctuary, but to both the houses of Israel, a stone to strike and a rock to stumble over, and a snare and a trap for the inhabitants of Jerusalem. And many will stumble over them. Then they'll fall and be broken. They will even be snared and caught." Then in Daniel 2, verses 34 and 35, "You will continue looking until a stone was cut without hands, and it struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and crushed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed all at the same time. And it became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away so that not a trace of them was found. But the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the whole earth." Now let's skip on down to verses 44 and 45. "And in those days, in the days of those kings, the Elohim of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed. And that kingdom will not be left for another people. It'll crush and put an end to all these kingdoms, but it will itself endure forever. Inasmuch as you saw that a stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it crushed the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great Elohim has made known to the king what will take place in the future. So the dream is true, and its interpretation is trustworthy." Now, because of their rejection of him, the Jewish people are going to be broken into pieces, as when the Romans destroyed Jerusalem and defeated the Jews in 70 AD. And they'll be scattered like dust, as they were scattered all over the world after that event. Yeshua, in knowing these prophecies and their near fulfillment, he wept over Jerusalem. We just talked about that last week. In Luke 19, verses 41 and 42, "And when he approached, he saw the city and wept over it, saying, If you had known in this day, even you, the things which make for peace, but now they've been hidden from your eyes." Going back to Luke 20, verses 19 and 20. "And the scribes and the chief priests tried to lay hands on him that very hour. And they feared the people, for they understood that he spoke this parable against them. And they watched him and sent spies who pretended to be righteous in order that they might catch him in some statement so as to deliver him up to the rule and the authority of the governor." See, the scribes and the chief priests knew that Yeshua was talking about them with those parables and the vineyard being taken away. So they sent spies who pretended to be righteous. They want to catch him making statements against Rome so they can have him arrested. Verse 21 missing. Verse 21 is missing. I'll read it to you. And they questioned him, saying, Teacher, we know that you speak and teach correctly, and you're not partial to any, but teach the way of Elohim in truth. Oh boy, here we go. Flattery. 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 Trying to use flattery on Yeshua. They say he teaches correctly. He's not in judgment. They say he teaches Torah in truth. And we've said it before here many times. Gossip and flattery are both wrong, and they're the diametric opposite of each other. Okay? Flattery is when you say something to someone's face that you won't say behind their back. And gossip is when you say something to someone behind their back that you won't say to their face. They're both wrong. They're both wrong. Psalm 12 verse 2 says, they speak falsehood to one another with flattering lips, and with a double heart they speak. Proverbs 29 verse 5, a man who flatters his neighbor is spreading a net for his steps. Go back to Luke 20, verse 22. Is it lawful for us to pay taxes to Caesar or not? But he detected their trickery and said to them, show me a denarius. Whose likeness and inscription does it have? And they said, Caesar's. And he said to them, then render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to Elohim the things that are Elohim's. See, the question was intended to bring rebellious words from Yeshua. That was the intention. Notice that what I always like about that, he didn't have any money on him. Okay? He didn't say, and he reacheth into his pocket and sifteth through his coins and pulled out a denarius. Notice it didn't say that, right? It said, so, anybody got a denarius? I don't have any money. See, he didn't pay taxes. Why didn't he pay taxes? Because he didn't own anything. Okay? He says, so it says, somebody, show me a denarius. That's about a day's wage, by the way. Yeshua says to pay the appropriate tax to Caesar and to pay the appropriate amounts to Elohim that he commands. Scripture tells us to honor Elohim and to honor the king. Proverbs 24, verse 21 says, my son, fear Yahweh and the king. Do not associate with those who are given to change. Ecclesiastes 8, starting at verse 2, I say, keep the command of the king because of the oath before Elohim. Do not be in a hurry to leave him. Do not join in an evil matter, for he will do whatever he pleases. Since the word of the king is authoritative, who will say to him, what are you doing? He who keeps a royal command experiences no trouble, for a wise heart knows the proper time and procedure. Romans 13, verses 5 through 8 say, wherefore it is necessary to be in subjection, not only because of wrath, but also for conscience sake. For because of this you also pay taxes, for rulers are servants of Elohim, devoting themselves to this very thing. Render to all what is due them, tax to whom tax is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. Owe nothing to anyone except to love one another, for he who loves his neighbor has made full the Torah. 1 Peter 2, starting at verse 13, says, submit yourselves for Adonai's sake to every human institution, whether to a king as the one in authority, or to governors as sent by him for the punishment of evildoers and the praise of those who do right. For such is the will of Elohim, that by doing right you may silence the ignorance of foolish men. Act as free men, and do not use your freedom as a covering for evil, but use it as bondslaves of Elohim. Honor all men, love the brotherhood, fear Elohim, honor the king. In Luke 20, verse 26, we read, and they were unable to catch him in a saying in the presence of the people, and marveling at his answer, they became silent. See, Yeshua answered by using the word of Elohim. Kings are put into power by Elohim. In that day, Rome provided roads for the people, it provided military protection from enemies, and it provided a form of legal justice. It provided quite a bit, actually. Those things should be funded by those who are using them. verses 27 and 28. Now there came to him some of the Sadducees who say there is no resurrection. And they questioned him, saying, Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies, having a wife, and he is childless, his brother should take the wife and raise up offspring to his brother. The Sadducees are bringing up a law in the Torah that they thought was a proof that the resurrection would not happen. Okay, that's the Levirate law. And the Levirate law, that's in Deuteronomy 25, starting at verse 5. When brothers live together and one of them dies and has no son, the wife of the deceased shall not be married outside the family to a strange man. Her husband's brother shall go into her and take her to himself as wife and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. And it shall be that the firstborn whom she bears shall assume the name of his dead brother, that his name may not be blotted out from Israel. But if the man does not desire to take his brother's wife, then his brother's wife shall go up to the gate to the elders and say, My husband's brother refuses to establish a name for his brother in Israel. He is not willing to perform the duty of a husband's brother to me. Then the elders of his city shall summon him and speak to him, and if he persists and says, I do not desire to take her, then his brother's wife shall come to him in the sight of the elders, and pull his sandal off his foot, and spit in his face, and she shall declare, Thus it is done to the man who does not build up his brother's house. And in Israel his name shall be called the house of him whose sandal is removed. So that's the law. And the Sadducees are going to make light of this, make light of the resurrection because of this law. Verse 29. Now there were 7 brothers, and the first took a wife and died childless, and the second, and the third took her, and in the same way all 7 died, leaving no children. Finally the woman died also. In the resurrection, therefore, which one's wife will she be? For all 7 had her as a wife. So, here we go. The Sadducees asked what happens if a man dies, his brother takes that wife in accordance with Torah, and that man dies, and the younger brother takes a wife, and so on for 7 brothers. At the resurrection, whose wife will she be? That is, of course, preposterous, but not impossible. In his answer recorded in the book of Matthew, Yeshua prefaces his answer with a phrase. He says, You don't understand the scriptures, nor do you understand the power of Elohim. Look, that's in Matthew 22, verses 28 and 29. In the resurrection, therefore, whose wife of the 7 shall she be? For they all had her. But Yeshua answered and said to them, You are mistaken, not understanding the scriptures, nor the power of Elohim. And I think that's important to preface this with his answer. Verse 34, Then Yeshua said to them, The sons of this age marry and are given in marriage, but those who are considered worthy to attain to that age and the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage, for neither can they die anymore, for they're like angels and are sons of Elohim, being sons of the resurrection. The words in verse 35, very interesting. He lists 2 groups of people here. He lists those who are worthy to attain that age, which means those who are alive at the time of the resurrection, and he mentions the resurrection of the dead. They will both be changed at that time. Yeshua says there'll be no marriage after the resurrection. No more marriage. What's the purpose of marriage? To repopulate. That's the purpose. To raise children, to be a family, and to be companions too. But primarily the one thing is to raise children. Well, at the resurrection, there'll be no more death. In Isaiah 25, verses 7 and 8, And on this mountain he'll swallow up the covering which is over all peoples, even the veil which is stretched over all mountains, or nations, and he'll swallow up death for all time. And Adonai Yahweh will wipe tears away from all faces. He'll remove the reproach of his people from all the earth, for Yahweh has spoken. In Hosea 13, verse 14, Shall I ransom them from the power of the grave? Shall I redeem them from death? O death, where are your thorns? O grave, where is your sting? Compassion will be hidden from my sight. Apparently, if there's no more death, there's no more need for birth. As a matter of fact, if there's no more death, we can't keep multiplying. Okay? We cannot keep multiplying. Why not? It's a population issue. And we talked about this at creation when we went over that in Genesis early on. Evolutionists believe that mankind has been on the earth for, let's say in his somewhat present form, somewhat like 1 million years. Okay, or maybe a little longer, give or take, 100,000 or two. That's impossible. Now, according to the way the population grows, population of man grows, all right? The population of man does not decrease. It, may have, when the Black Plague, I think, hit the earth, it had a little dip, but for the most part, we're on an upward incline the whole time because we're at the top of the food chain. Mankind's population increases, let's say 2% a year, roughly 2% a year. Let's assume that due to wars and disease and whatever, that mankind only increased 0.5% a year, 1/4 of that much of what we know it to be measured. So at 0.5% increase a year, if man were on the earth for 1 million years, and you started out with a couple people, you know how many people there would be after 1 million years at 0.5% a year? More than the number of electrons in the universe. Okay? Ask an accountant about the power of the interest rate. Compounded makes a big difference. Whereas if you take a small group of people, say 8 people, and you take it back up, use that 0.5% a year, compounded by 4,400 years or so ago, which is Scripture says when the flood happened, you start out with 8 people, 0.5% a year. Guess how many people you get? About 7 billion. Okay? So, anyway. See why we couldn't keep reproducing if we don't die? See, that's because they didn't know the power of Elohim. All right? We can't keep multiplying. You don't know the power of the Father. Yeshua says we'll be like angels. In Daniel 12, verses 2 and 3, we read, "And many of those who sleep in the dust of the ground will awake, these to everlasting life, but the others to disgrace and everlasting contempt. And those who have insight will shine brightly like the brightness of the expanse of heaven, and those who lead the many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever." Yeshua said we'll be like the angels and we'll be like sons, we will be sons of Elohim. In Malachi 3, verses 17 and 18, "And they'll be mine, says the Yahweh of hosts, on the day that I prepare my own possession, and I'll spare them as a man spares his own son who serves him." So you'll again distinguish between the righteous and the wicked, between the one who serves Elohim and the one who does not serve him. Romans 8, starting at verse 17, "And if children, heirs also, heirs of Elohim and fellow heirs with Messiah, if indeed we suffer with him in order that we may also be glorified with him. For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory that is to be revealed to us. For the anxious longing of the creation awaits eagerly for the revealing of the sons of Elohim. For the creation was subjected to futility, not of its own will, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself also will be set free from its slavery to corruption into the freedom of the glory of the children of Elohim. For we know that the whole creation groans and suffers the pains of childbirth until now. And not only this, but also we ourselves, having the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves groan within ourselves, awaiting eagerly for our adoption as sons, the redemption of our body." Okay, he says not only this, but also we ourselves, having the first fruits of the Spirit or breath of the Father. What's he talking about? What's he mean by we ourselves having the first fruits of the Spirit or the breath of the Father? That was what we were given, was the breath of the Father within us. That's the first fruits of the breath of the Spirit of the Father. And we're waiting eagerly for this adoption and redemption of our body, which will change. Going back to Luke 20, verse 37. "But that the dead are raised," even Moses showed in the passage about the burning bush where he calls Adonai the Elohim of Abraham, the Elohim of Isaac, and the Elohim of Jacob. Now, he's not the Elohim of the dead, but of the living, for all live to him. Yeshua states that the resurrection is a fact. he uses the example of Moses calling Elohim the Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And that Elohim is not the Elohim of the dead, but the Elohim of the living. At the resurrection, Moses knew that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob would live again. Moses was aware of the resurrection. Verse 39. And some of the scribes answered and said, Teacher, you've spoken well. For they did not have courage to question him any longer about anything. And he said to them, How is it that they say that Messiah is David's son? For David himself says in the book of Psalms, Yahweh said to my Adonai, Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. David therefore calls him master. And how is he his son? You know, he quotes Psalm 110, which speaks of Elohim himself ruling over the earth. And once again, this is one of the most quoted Psalms, okay? One of the most quoted parts of Scripture, because this is the place in Scripture it said Messiah will be at the right hand of the Father. And what we have here is David has a vision of the throne of Elohim and Messiah standing to his right hand. We read in Psalm 110, Yahweh says to my Adonai, Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. Yahweh will stretch forth his strong scepter from Zion, saying, Rule in the midst of your enemies. Your people will volunteer freely in the day of power in holy array from the womb of the dawn. Your youth are to you as a dew. How is it that Messiah is called David's son, but David calls him master? That doesn't make sense. Luke 20, verse 45. While all the people were listening, he said to his disciples, Beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and love respectful greetings in the marketplaces and chief seats in the synagogues and places of honor at banquets, who devour widows' houses, and for appearance's sake offer long prayers. These will suffer greater condemnation. Well, how could David call his son master? How could he do that? Why would he do that? Because his son is the word of the Father made flesh. That's why. Now the scribes use their power to get honor and respect from the people. They also use their power to devour widows' houses. In Isaiah 10, the first 3 verses, Woe to those who enact evil statutes and to those who constantly record unjust decisions, so as to deprive the needy of justice and rob the poor of my people of their rights, in order that widows may be their spoil, and that they may plunder the orphans. Now what will you do in the day of punishment and in the devastation which will come from afar? To whom will you flee for help, and where will you leave your wealth? He says for the sake of appearance, they offer long prayers. He said they're going to receive the greater condemnation. See, there's going to be levels of punishment, just as there will be levels of reward. We read about one of those punishments just the other night. This guy named Korah tries to lead a group of people, of Levites, against Moses and Aaron. That didn't work out too well. No. And I mean, what I said there, when that punishment was come out, wouldn't you want to be in a different area code? I mean, I wouldn't want to be anywhere near that. Okay? Well, he says that's what's going to happen to these guys, the greater condemnation. Any questions, any thoughts on Luke chapter 20? Now, Luke 21 is going to be very, very interesting. That's when he talks about the destruction of Jerusalem and also his return.